webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thanks to all for logging in a little early. We're going to start in about 2 minutes. Thank you all for logging in this morning or this afternoon, depending on your time zone. And I wanted to welcome you to the first quarter 2022 PartsTrader Industry Trends Report. We always try to bring you fresh and new content, and we're changing things up a little bit and providing a glimpse and some insights from our special guest, Ken Rosen. Ken is, as a lot of you may know, the former Claims Executive Vice President and Chief Claims Officer at Allstate, and also was at USAA as a Chief Claims Officer. And I really want to thank Ken for his participation today in the webinar. Let's go with the agenda. And first of all, we're going to look at a review of the latest news and affecting the collision and insurance industries. We're going to get an update, a recent interview given by the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles on the situation of the backlog at the Port of Los Angeles, which has been impacting most of our aftermarket as well as some of the foreign manufactured new OEM parts. We're going to look at some surprising news about Tesla sales in the US, and we're going to give a quick update on new EVs headed to the US. And there's one from a very unexpected country coming into the US, and they've got a unique twist on how to offer EVs to the US market. We're going to look at an overview of the parts delays that we have done in the past. We're going to look at it by car maker and by part type. And then we're going to take a little bit different look at it by some important core business statistical areas, CBSAs. We're going to look at it at 3 or 4 different major metropolitan areas across the US. We're going to look at 2018 Toyota Camry parts, Honda Accord parts, and F-150 parts, because those are usually the most repaired vehicles or close to it in most of our books of business. And so we're going to get an idea of what the parts delays are in various areas across the country, and if locale really makes a difference. And as I mentioned, Ken will give us some of his insights. I will ask him some questions, hopefully pretty involved questions that we can get some good answers to. So first off, Ford has announced that they are suspending production at 8 US facilities across the US. A Ford spokesperson indicated that the chip shortage was responsible for this suspension, which is really interesting. And it impacts, unfortunately, Ford's best-selling vehicles, the F-Series, the new Bronco, and the Mach-E. The really interesting thing is that, the Bronco has really been hit with a lot of production delays. There was a recall from American Sunroof Corporation on those hard tops. we're seeing, and if you have some spare time, you can look at various YouTube videos of Bronco initial quality inspections. They've got some pretty interesting issues going on with the production of the Bronco. In addition to these parts delays and production delays, they've actually delivered some vehicles that have, for example, mismatched taillights. One would have an incandescent bulb on the driver's side taillight and then an LED light installed on the passenger side. So there's a lot of quality issues that Ford is addressing as this shutdown. So maybe it's a blessing in disguise. The other thing I wanted to bring up is the impact of the Canadian trucker protests. If you've been watching the news, you've heard that, you know, this is an issue kind of across Canada, but it actually impacts U.S. production of new vehicles just when we don't need that. As we start to ramp up production, Toyota announced Thursday that there was a shortage of Canadian-made parts from their Ontario production plants that had hit and impacted their production in Kentucky. Ford and GM have also noted that they are seeing the impact of this. Now, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has enacted the Emergencies Act, which is preventing these truckers from continuing to block intersections and block bridges for trucking over to the U.S. So we'll see if that resolves anything. We always want to look at new vehicle sales by the number because as we look at both the collision repair industry and the insurance industry, we see that new vehicles sales really go into the car park and impact the average age of vehicle, impact used vehicle residuals, etc. We've seen some unprecedented used vehicle values due in large part to the lack of supply of new vehicles. So you're seeing some record used vehicle prices. We're going to go into that as well in a couple of minutes. But National Auto Dealers Association predicts now that 2022 full U.S. light vehicle sales will be 15.4 million by the end of the year. If you recall last year, every time we did a broadcast, we would have to revise that number downward. In 2021, initially it was supposed to be 16.1 million new vehicles. As production delays and supply delays hit the new vehicle production, they revised it down pretty much every quarter until we finally finalized the numbers in 2021 at 14.9 million, which was not great, but it was actually 3% higher than 2020. But when you look at that, prior to COVID, we were at 5 straight years of over 17 million new vehicle sales. So this is going to impact us for the long term. When we have a downturn in new vehicle sales, not only does it impact the collision repair market because you see higher residual values on used cars, so that threshold potentially moves so that more vehicles are repaired, which is a good thing. But when the vehicle is totaled, you're seeing record used car prices, which is not, you know, it depends on where you are in that total loss cycle. The problem is when we settle total losses and there isn't a new vehicle to be had at a reasonable price, that makes for a lot of agita between the vehicle owner, the total loss sufferer, as well as the carrier. So we have a lot of things we have to consider. The average new vehicle price, the transaction price, has hit a record $47,077. And it is because we're seeing vehicles sell not only at MSRP, but over. I was at a dealership last weekend, and the car salesman proudly proclaimed that he is selling vehicles with a $5,000 surcharge over MSRP, to which I smiled and said, well, you may be selling them, but you won't be selling one to me at that. When we look at the wholesale used vehicle prices, we're actually seeing potentially a signal that used car prices are leveling off after record increases. Manheim's used vehicle price index, which tracks the vehicle sold at their auctions, rose just 0.04% in January compared to December. That is a flattening for sure, but not all great news, because when you look at that January number compared to a year earlier in January, it was 45% higher. So that is a huge jump. And we're going to have to see if that leveling out continues and what impact, the Canadian trucker slowdown, the continued chip shortage, and all of the other issues that we're seeing across this supply chain, what's going to happen there. And I'd mentioned in the beginning of the program that we were going to look at some surprising Tesla numbers. Cox Automotive suggests, their data suggests, that Tesla actually outsold BMW, regardless of BMW's fuel type, so gasoline as well as hybrid as well as fully EVs, that the EV vehicle Tesla actually outsold and became the top luxury brand in the United States. That's amazing. Now, it is an estimate because Elon Musk and Tesla does not break out sales by country. They just deliver an overall number, which is a benefit, I'm sure, to their stockholders. But when you look at Cox's estimate of data, they estimate that Tesla in 2021 sold 352,471 vehicles, which healthy outpacing of BMW sales at 336. Lexus again coming in at third. Mercedes, because there were more vehicles manufactured in the U.S. from Mercedes, they make their smaller SUVs as well as some of their C classes in the United States. They suffered more than BMW did with the semiconductor chip shortage, and they sold a mere 276,000. That is probably one of their worst sales years in quite a long time. Tesla has indicated that once their Austin, Texas plant and their Brandenburg, Germany plants are fully up to production, that they will be able to globally produce over 1 million vehicles a year. And the reason I bring that up is that, if we've been involved in collision repair in Tesla, we know what a nightmare that has been over the years. As they ramp up production, that vehicle has become more and more popular, and we really need to make sure that the collision response from a company like Tesla has the part supply, has the repairability figured into the overall life expectancy of this vehicle. And that'll be interesting to see as they ramp up and become a very major player in this industry. I know a lot of underwriting departments really kind of cringe when they see the amount of Teslas rising on the books because of this lack of overall collision repair strategy by that manufacturer. And on related Tesla news, the biggest thing I think that is preventing full EVs from being the major market force that they are becoming, but they should have been probably earlier, is that coined term range anxiety. People are, really afraid that if their vehicle has a small range or a lower overall mileage range, that they're going to be stuck. You can't have AAA bring you a can of electricity if you run out of charge. So interestingly enough, recently a Michigan battery upstart manufacturer called Our Next Energy, or One, retrofitted with their proprietary battery technology into a Tesla Model S. And they achieved a 752-mile range in a real world testing, a full range without recharging. The interesting thing is that they had an average speed of 55 miles an hour, which means they were under full battery drain for quite a while. The other interesting thing is they pointed out that they did it during the winter, or the late fall, early winter, and the temperatures reached a high of only 41 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's important because most EVs have a reduced mileage range when the temperatures outside, the ambient temperature outside is lower. Now, part of that is because you have to run the electric motor to heat the vehicle, run the windshield wipers, etc. But also just the battery technology is such that the full charge and the use of that charge is reduced in cold temperatures. And we noticed that on the first generation Nissan Leaf. If you recall, back then, we found that the full range of a first gen Leaf was about 125 miles, which in today's world is negligible. But when the temperature was below 40 degrees, that the overall range was reduced to about 45 miles. So it was a big, big difference. That doesn't exist on the new batteries as much, and I think this ONE battery technology proves that we can have an amazing range. 752 miles is quite an impressive range, because when you look at where we're at currently, depending on the equipment level configuration for the Tesla Model S, you can get anywhere from 348 to 405 miles from that factory battery pack. So it is very, very impressive, the increase we got with 752 miles out of this retrofitted battery. As comparison, the Chevy Bolt, which is a big selling vehicle, their full range is 250 miles. Now the newcomer, which you see starting to launch in the industry, is the Lucid Air. 520 miles. That is a very, very impressive range. It does, as you can see, outpace the current Tesla. Those vehicles, the Lucid Air and the Tesla Model S, will go head to head for the EV customer. And the idea that an outsider, a non-Tesla battery, can improve the range that significantly is really, really interesting to me. Now, I'd mentioned that we were going to look, and I was going to give you some information on a new vehicle entering the US market, a new full EV. This is called the VinFast VF8 and VF9. VinFast, when I first heard that name, I literally thought it was a VIN decoding company, not a car manufacturer. But they are actually manufacturing cars currently. The interesting thing is that it will be the first vehicle imported to the US, and they're expecting it to become ready for import late Q3, early Q4 of this year. And the vehicles are being manufactured in Vietnam. The vehicle VinFast, the company, manufactures vehicles. They are on the road now in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. They do actually have a partnership for an internal combustion engine vehicle, with the powertrains being supplied by General Motors. But this is the full EVs that are set to come into the US. They have a total of 5 vehicles in the range, but knowing that the Americans love that midsize SUV and compact SUV, they're bringing in the VinFast VF8 and VF9. The interesting thing is, if you can look at the pricing associated with these vehicles, the VF8 has a starting price of $41,000 and the VF9 at $56,000. The fit and finish are very good. You can look at some YouTubes of these vehicles being seen at the Las Vegas Consumer Electronics Show, the LA Auto Show, etc. The really, really interesting thing about this is that when you buy the vehicle, they give you an option of the battery, and the battery is leased. So it is a separate transaction. You buy the vehicle, you make your payments on the vehicle, and you have a lease payment rolled into that of between $100 to $150, depending on the battery type you select. And you can see their cutaway here that actually shows that the floor pan of this vehicle is largely a cell battery. Interesting news about this is that the other thing I think that is holding up people from buying a full EV is that concept of battery deterioration over time. We know from Teslas and Bolts and some of the other vehicles that replacing that full battery is a huge undertaking. And I think what's really interesting about this is that VinFast is actually using this as a bolt-in from the bottom floor pan, and so it eases and lowers the cost of swapping out that battery. So you buy this vehicle, and literally when you look at it, there's very, very few wear items on a full EV, right? You've got your tires, you've got your brakes, wheel bearings, etc. That's it. The biggest wear factor over a long period of time, if you've known people that have Priuses, or Prii is the correct plural, they actually have to have those battery cells remanufactured. So this is a really interesting new approach to the market. I'm really, really curious to see how this vehicle is accepted in the US market, and whether this unique way of leasing a battery helps EV adoption in the US. As I promised, we have an update from Gene Soroka, who is the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles. The interesting thing is he's saying right now 55% of our truck gates, and I talked last update about that, that is where you have to make a reservation to get onto the Port of Los Angeles to have a crane lower that shipping container onto your truck. They said that 55% of those truck gates go unused every day. So they've got half of their capacity in the latent stage, meaning they have late pickups for that. They still have not, at this point, done what they had threatened to do, which is put a $100 a day charge on every container being there over time. We've seen a lot of objections to that happening, because we just have it's not truly the port that is at issue, it is the trucks as well as the trains, because he also mentions they've got 30% of the rail capacity not being used at Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach as of last week. So they say they are able to handle more cargo than ever before, but it's just getting the rail and the trucks on site. The interesting thing is that he has said, in terms of backlog, we've reduced the containers sitting more than 9 days or longer by 74%. So they have less than 10,000 units on the ground, which is well below that 37,000 peak container issue they had back in October. And if you remember from our last broadcast, when we talked about those delays back in October, that was part and parcel because October at the Port of Los Angeles is truly Christmas season. We get a lot of imports coming into the Port of Los Angeles to supply Walmart and all the other retailers from China, most of Asia, including Taiwan. They were coming in and really, really flooding. So there was some seasonality to that back in October, but also we still have that bottleneck with the trucking and the rails. Good news is, overall, systematically, they are making improvements. Of course, it's not as fast as we all like to see it, but we are seeing, that reduction. That has ripple effects. We talked in our last broadcast about the cost of a 60-day rental for a 40-foot shipping container that went up literally tenfold from Kaohsiung, Taiwan to the Port of Los Angeles. A 60-day round trip used to be, before the supply chain issues, about $2,500 round trip rental fee. That went up to more than $25,000 during the peak. That has leveled off, but it has still not returned to pre-supply chain problem levels of $2,200 to $2,500. That means we still will potentially see a wave of price increases impacting aftermarket collision parts as we move on into full year 2022. Now, I had mentioned we would make or provide an update on what was going on with the median delivery days for all part types. And if you're new to the broadcast this time, let me walk you through these charts. What we look at here is, rather than the average, because when you average something, it has the function of sort of diluting the impact of outliers. If we look at median days and then put in 2 standard deviations, we capture about 95% of the true impact of all parts delivery days throughout the US. So if you look at the upper left, that gray bar chart shows that the median plus 2 standard deviations actually went up in January of 2022 to 15.3 days. We did see the median actually jump up again because we're measuring a different measure of time. Throughout 2021, we saw the median still at a day, which is absolutely correct. We get most of our parts delivered same day, a couple of milk runs a day. So you're going to see that median at 1 day throughout 2021. But we started to see the impact of those small components with delays really hit in June and onward, so that we saw literally a doubling from the median delivery time plus 2 standard deviations from March of 2021 through December. We start off January of 2022 at 15.3 days. Big delays. As we go over to the box chart on the upper right, standard deviation by make, it should be no surprise to anybody who's dealing with these vehicles that Honda and Acura really are the ones with the highest delays. If you look at the Toyota nameplate over this period of time, it's doing pretty well with delivery times of 7.8 days. Compare that to Honda at 20.7 days. That is an amazing, almost triple of the delivery time than Toyota is. Acura slightly worse than Honda main brand at 23.8. We see BMW, and then down in that little corner there, it's not even big enough to have a label on it, but that is Audi. As you go down to the lower right, you'll see that the poor suffering folks in South Dakota have the longest delivery times of the US across all part types, and we'll go into a little bit of detail where that's coming from. As we split out OE, we don't see much of a change in the map overall as far as delivery. We still see Honda, Acura. We do see BMW actually rise up as a bigger manufacturer again, because these are some OE heavy brands. BMW at 19.7 days. Kia comes in there with some issues. Surprisingly, we see good performance out of some what I would call OE heavier brands like Subaru, VW, etc. But overall 16.7 days. So when we look at the overall parts impact, OEs are still driving the overall delays. As I've said before, it really is, you know, the OEs, they don't have a luxury of not producing a part. When we compare the OEMs to aftermarkets just go after the most common damaged part for collision repair. So they're doing bumper covers, they're doing absorbers, rebars, headlamps, fenders, hoods, etc. That's very easy. They got a small number of part numbers, SKUs. They can produce those. You won't see the shortages. The OEs have to deliver the airbags, the unique bumper sliders, the side trim, all of that. So that's one of the reasons we see more delays when it comes to OE parts, is because they have to deliver every part. When you look at aftermarket, a couple of things. We see the median very consistent at just about a day. Interestingly, though, at the beginning of January 2022, the delivery time actually went down. We see more blue across with only Acura. And again, because Acura is, again, what I've termed as sort of that OE heavy. So when we look at the heat map of the states, it's looking pretty good across the country, all very dark blue. So I guess the takeaway here, if you have an Acura and you happen to live in the South Dakota, you're going to be in for some delays. When we look at recycled, again, South Dakota, really sad thing about South Dakota. Apparently there's, there's not a lot of delivery warehouses for the alternate parts. There are a few salvers, so you are dependent on surrounding states to get some of your parts. The interesting thing is that when it comes to recycled, the outlier overall, if we look in at that upper right-hand corner chart, is Mitsubishi. Again, we look at the median delivery days at just over 2 days. When it comes to recycled, that's been fairly steady. It was steady in 2021 as well, about that time. We actually do see a slight decrease from 4.3 days in December to 4.1. So a little bit of improvement in the aftermarket and recycled. Ken and I are going to touch potentially when we get into our conversation on when do we see this situation returning to normal, and I'll give you my thoughts on it when we round off the conversation. As promised, I wanted to take a look at some core business statistical areas, CBSAs, and look at popular part types. So we chose front bumper, front lamps, and hoods for 2018 Accord, Camry, and F-150. So we've got some of the top selling vehicles out there. And you can see that location does make a difference. I think the really interesting thing is that the outlier for Toyota Camrys was in hoods, in that PA, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland CBSA. That is really surprisingly high at 5 days. The rest, the only other one that sort of pops up are a couple of 3 days in, surprisingly, for the Accord, that same Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland CBSA, and then down for the Camry in Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater. So it is very regional. You're looking for the OEs at different part distribution centers or PDCs across the country, being able to deliver timeliness for deliveries, to their various supplying dealers. For the aftermarket, it is dependent on where their delivery warehouses are, where they can ship to, etc. We have some vendors on PartsTrader that ship nationally. So that should be less of an issue if you're able to wait for that shipping. So that's sort of our roundup as news. Again, I want to take this minute to thank Ken Rosen for attending. Again, Ken has a long and illustrious career in the property casualty arena. And Ken, thank you very much. Let me start with asking you a few questions.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Happy to be here today.
Thank you. Okay, so again, this is kind of a broad question, but what are the greatest challenges that you see facing auto insurers in the P&C business today?
Yeah, we certainly have no shortage of challenges, right? And I think about it in these categories. It's around people, capacity, severity, and technology. And we'll just take each one of those as a double click on each one of those categories, right? So from a people perspective, as everyone is well aware, employee value propositions have shifted over the last 18 months or so. More experienced folks are, walking off the playing field, so to speak, and the bench of people coming up the ranks continues to get thinner. This challenge of, attracting, training, I would say, and retaining talent is a headwind. It's been a headwind for a while, but it's been exacerbated over the last, 18, 24 months. You couple that with, work from home challenges, creating new policies and processes for the insurers, and that just, adds to the headwinds. Now, I think there's, some very bright lights there when we can get it right. We increase the value proposition of employees and hopefully attract more to our industry. And, capacity was another headwind for us. When I'm talking about capacity in this particular instance, it's really around vehicle repairs, so the capacity to repair vehicles, the capacity for insurers to get their customers' vehicles repaired, right? We have headwinds there that are driving this, things such as, again, shortage of technicians, much like what I just talked about before on the adjuster side, on the people side. It's happening in the auto collision repair industry from a capacity perspective. We're seeing somewhat of an increase of non-drives or heavy hits coming into shops, and it's really partly driven by what you mentioned earlier about this increase of actual cash value or ACVs, making it more economically feasible to repair versus total a vehicle. And they have longer cycle times, obviously. And so all all the assorted issues that come with repairing a heavier hit, and that's a headwind really for the industry. Not to mention what you were talking about before around supply chain issues, also contributing to the overall increase of work in process vehicles, if you will, which slows cycle times, which impacts obviously the insurers and the insurers as well. Severity, right? People capacity, severity, it's a headwind. For the insurance industry, they hit the trifecta, so to speak, right? Auto collision repair, home reconstruction, injury costs are all rising. There's all headwinds there. And, again, this length of time or cycle time it takes to repair a vehicle or a home in this instance is also creating, driving this headwind in severity. And then, the fourth thing I answered, I said was technology. And this is a double-edged sword for our industry. Digitization and straight-through processing is a gift, but it's coming at us at lightning speed. It's causing us to, have to shift the paradigm of from thinking in maybe weeks to days to hours, literally down to minutes, in completing either an end-to-end claim process or pieces of the claim process. This impacts adjusters, customers, repairers, and so how we all play in this ecosystem to be super efficient and effective. Like I said, it's a double-edged sword. Some are doing well with that, others are struggling a bit. But so again, those are I would say my top 4 areas of greatest challenge.
Yeah, well said. I would say too that I've spoken with a number of collision repair shops, and they're seeing a capacity strain on the other side. They're saying that it is taking longer for them to get supplement approvals or inspections even from their insurance company partners, and that too because of the capacity shortage. We talked about the folks leaving the claims part of the organization and the bench strength not being as strong, but we're also seeing that just the lack of approvals from in-process work has thrown a curveball at the collision repairers.
Yeah,
absolutely agree.
Yeah, spot on.
And hey, from a personal note, I've got 3 of my 6 kids actually in either the claims industry or the auto body industry, so I'm doing my part.
I love it. It is a, it's a noble, and I mean that sincerely, it's a noble industry we're in, whether you're on the insurer side or the repairer side. We're all trying to focus on helping people out of a tough spot and getting back on the road to recovery, right? So good stuff.
Absolutely. I've got, I've been in this industry as you have for a good part of our lives, and it's a very rewarding industry. Having come from the shop side myself, and then working on the carrier side, and then working for vendors, all folks really looking for the common good of restoring people back to their pre-loss condition.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question, again, it's sort of a broad one. It's like, you've had experiences with several different claims organizations. What's really going well for P&C carriers, and what are the opportunities beyond, what we've already touched on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. So I would say, in general, and again, this is one person's opinion, mine, the claims organizations do an outstanding job, really, of responding to customers during their time of need and continuing to keep that focus. There are absolute the best of intentions are present, I would think, across all claims organizations on like doing the right thing, picking people up, dusting them off, get them back on the road to recovery as quickly as possible, while dealing with the challenges that we've been talking about kind of throughout this webinar. Whether it's a catastrophic situation, a catastrophe, or a non-catastrophe situation, doesn't matter. They are, I think, claims organizations in general really rise to the occasion and just shine and do the right things there. The other thing I would say too, and I think is well placed and well positioned, is a focus on overall reduction in cost in a responsible manner. And I want to make sure I put that, heavy emphasis on in a responsible manner. And focusing on removing, I would say, unnecessary steps in the process for both the customer and the adjuster. And so, who doesn't like it when something goes faster, with less friction? It's good for the customer and good for the overall insurer as they continue to chip away at the expenses of running a business. So I think those are a couple of things that are, I think, going right, and obviously a work in progress, I would say, for the industry and for most insurers.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up on that.
Sure.
We see a lot of news about the larger P&C carriers abandoning their large brick and mortar operations, whether it be corporate headquarters that they've downsized or regional operations that they've literally closed up shop, and that COVID-induced work from home has become permanent. Do you see that as an advantage for the carriers because of that reduced costs? Is it affecting productivity? How do you see that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And again, I'm for those of you who know me, I'm trying to always look at things from a glass is half full. I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist. And so I'd say first from an optimistic perspective, the silver lining from a COVID perspective was it absolutely increased the speed at which carriers are moving to virtual claim handling, virtual sales, policyholder service, you name it, going virtual, allowing people to work pretty much where they want at a necessity. I think carriers, some responded better than others because they already had this on their roadmap. It just expedited them getting to this literally at 90+% of their organizations working from home. So now the natural progression is, wow, do we need this footprint? And, believe it or not, we've been in this for at least, say, 18 months. And I think carriers are seeing their way through to that. And you see several carriers have announced, like you said, starting to sell off real estate, downsizing real estate. When you do that, clearly, you have a reduction in overhead, which I think is wonderful. Overall, you take that off the backs of the carriers, and then hopefully that results in taking that off the backs of customers in the space of rates, or being able to potentially keep rates flat or reduce rates at some point in the future. So I think that is overall it's a very positive move. I think it's one that's here to stay, but you also have to remember too, it brings with it some responsibility and accountability to ensure you have the right systems in place to focus on ensuring that you are being as productive as you were when you were in the office, you have a quality work product. So those are all things you have to make sure you have in the system to make sure it's successful.
Agreed. So what do you think are the areas now in APD claims that are the most volatile, the most prone to issues?
Yeah, so I would say too, just on the other piece, I'm going to answer this twofold. First, I'm not going to skate where you said, hey, what are insurance companies or claims organizations doing well, and where's their opportunities? I just want to also hit on something that I see as an area of opportunity. So data and analytics is, it's all the rage, right? If you look 7 or 8 years ago, it was in play, but it wasn't like a hyper focus. What I am absolutely encouraged by and excited about is that we are bringing data and analytics to the table to make data-driven decisions, right? I'm not gonna say every organization is doing this, but I think many are. So that's a positive, right? But where I see it as an opportunity is when we're pulling and analyzing data and taking that data at face value and running with it versus asking second and third order questions before making decisions is an area, I think, of improvement or opportunity for some or for many. So for example, severity is on the rise, but do we know why, right? And we get some reports that we may rush to implement some tactical solutions instead of stepping back and taking that valuable data and taking some time to better understand, root cause analysis, right? An appropriate example for this webinar would be really, the analysis of parts costs and what's driving severity potentially. Do we really understand what's in the data set? Do we have a baseline, a true clean baseline? And then how are we measuring that going forward? So again, area of opportunity is using the data and analytics that we have, doing a second, third order click to make sure we understand what's in the data before going ahead and making conclusions. So I don't know if that want to wrap up that, that second question, if you would.
Oh, I appreciate that, because that is, and people that have read my blog absolutely know this is one of my pet peeves. We have been, as APD folks, accustomed to measuring things such as alternate part usage as a percentage of parts dollars. And really, when you look at that, all that does is reward the most expensive alternate part being chosen for that repair. Because, my simple example is always, you have $1,000 part spend, you have a $200 alternate part listed. When you measure percentage of parts dollars, that's 20%. But if you actually go the next step and you find a less expensive part, say a $100 part, and the OEM for this example stays the same at $800, you've lowered your denominator as well as your numerator. And when you're measuring percentages, you're at 11%. So I am shocked that people are still measuring something as basic as that in that flawed metric. And it's only touching the iceberg, but I absolutely agree. We are starting to embrace the power of data. We just have to do it in that responsible way of truly digging down and saying, is the rise in severity a problem, or is it just the fact that the vehicle mix has changed, or the year of the vehicle, or the seasonality with more parts on the claim? There's so many underlying factors that you really have to consider. So absolutely, asking the second, third, and fourth questions makes a difference.
Yep, well said.
Lastly, where do you see this industry in the next year to 5 years? And just a quick overview.
Yeah, so again, not having the proverbial crystal ball, again, here are some thoughts. It's an interesting question, and there's some overlap, I think, between 1 and 5 years. So I'm going to state the obvious first, right? Adjusting to, and I'll put in air quotes, the new normal over the next 12 months, right? We've had lots of change hitting us, like we just talked about, over the last 40 minutes or so. So over the next 12 months, I think we really are getting into perfecting what we started. For instance, as an example, perfecting what we started from a work at home perspective. The flexible work processes or the flexible models to improve employee value prop so that we can continue to build the bench, in the insurance industry. That is absolutely over the next 12 months. I think we're going to see that happen in droves. Working with our HR partners on how we better attract, train, and retain employees to build the bench is paramount to ensuring the industry is a going concern, for the next, for eternity. I think building more partnerships with, and I'll use the word vendors or suppliers, some people use partners, really to achieve best-in-class outcomes for the mutual customer, for our insureds, for the vehicle owner. This has been alive and well forever, but I think over the next 12 months, we're going to see this really increase significantly, because there are benefits to both the insurer, to the individual vehicle owner, and clearly to the partner vendors as we build these much tighter relationships. I also think that we're going to see an increased use of, I would say, telematics and IoT, right? So telematics has been around for a while. It's been all the rave for the last 10 years. People are saying, the car's gonna be driving by themselves, autonomously 100%, whatever that is. I'm just getting into the point of saying, telematics are out there. Some companies are using it more than ever, but I think it's going to be more ubiquitous in how we use telematics to handle claims and get processes started, to get cars to the right place the first time, to determine whether a car needs to be repaired or totaled. There are some doing that today and doing it really well, or others that are learning, but I think we're going to perfect that over the next year. And the same goes for IoT too. I mean, that's mostly on the homeowner side, this Internet of Things. But again, I think that ecosystem will be alive and well on the auto side as well. And then, we could go on and on, but I'll just give one more example on the 1 year piece. I think balancing the need to automate more, which I think a lot of us are doing, a lot of companies are doing, introducing more self-service capabilities for the customers and for vendors, but having the appropriate amount of human intervention, right? You got to have some human touch, some automation. A combination of both, I think, is the best outcome. Allowing people to weave in and out of the channel of their choice as they interact with the insurers or the providers will be key. So I think that's over the next 12 months, I think we continue to see that perfect. Next 5 years, I think we see this dramatic improvement in straight-through processing with appropriate controls, right? I think that goes for APD. I think it goes for casualty claims as well as property claims, the homeowner claims, right? I think we're going to continue to see that, absolutely speed up dramatically. But I think that's over the next 5 years. You're going to see much more self-service than before. Will be a great cost reduction for all on the expense side. The rapid adoption of connected vehicles to allow us to be with the customer at the time of their loss, literally near real time. There are some that say they do it today, others are working on it, but again, I think it's going to become ubiquitous over the next 5 years. Dramatically improving how we're going to use data from the telematics that we receive to make accurate decisions. And that's happening in the next 1 year view, but I think that becomes a way of doing, just the way of doing business over the next 5 years. The infrastructure and the technology is going to just continue to improve, I think, and it's going to be best for all involved. And then I would say on the insurer side, continued consolidation, both like on the insurer side and also on the vendor side, right? As we see that happening on the auto collision side of the house, you see some acquisitions happening on the insurance side, on the P&C side of the house. I think we're going to see that dramatically increase over the next 5 years.
I agree to everything you've said. And I think that you'll have to make me a promise that you and I will meet in a year and then in 5 years as well. And we'll validate your predictions. How about that?
We'll see how that goes. No crystal ball, but just what I'm seeing over time. I think those are some, fairly consistent pieces of information.
Excellent. Well, at this point, we're done with our presentation. If any of the attendees had questions, please write them, email them to me, greg.horn@partstrader.com, and I'll do my best to answer those questions. Once again, Ken, thank you so much for your insights. I really thought that you painted a good, balanced picture of what we're experiencing since COVID and what we can look forward to in the next year and 5 years. And with that, I want to thank everyone for attending. You will receive a recording of this broadcast. If you signed up with your email, you'll get an email of a link to that recording that should be in the next 24 hours. We do post these on YouTube as well, so stay tuned for that. But my heartfelt appreciation for everyone who has listened in today. I really do. I am humbled by this and appreciate your attendance. And with that, I'm signing off. Ken, thanks again.
Okay.
We'll see you next quarter.
All right. Take care, folks. Have a great day.
Thanks.